Welcome to the April Sustainable Breakfast Series featuring a panel conversation about our local food system. As I mentioned, as you join, please introduce yourself in the chat. After the program, we also will have networking, which is going to be a separate link. You should have received it in your email. Towards the end of the program, we'll put that link in the chat too, so if people want to jump over to the other Zoom room to network. Happy Earth Month, Earth Day this month. For a lot of us, it's Extension Dane, and in the community every day feels like Earth Day. But just want to take a pause to recognize and celebrate the special month we have. This is a photo of the trash collection that we conducted in partnership with Ian's Pizza around Garver and Starkweather Creek. Thank you to those that joined us. We had about 800 pounds of trash that was collected. So really, really wonderful impact that day. We also launched our first Master Recyclers course this month, and over 250 people joined us and gained amazing recycling knowledge and are now teaching and doing projects in the community. We also have our virtual Eco Challenge still going on. If you'd like to join our team, this is a list of sustainable actions, can help you think creatively about what you can do this month. This is based on Project Drawdown's climate solutions, who some of you may have seen at our 2020 summit. And then lastly, I want to celebrate that the City of Madison, in partnership with Elevate, Extension Dane, and the Northside Planning Council, received a Office of Innovation grant to be able to focus on our NOAA work. This is increasing efficiency, affordability, and resilience in the small to medium-sized multifamily housing, with really the goal to reduce operating expense for owners and energy burden for residents, and addressing that intersection of housing resiliency, equity, and climate change. Oh, welcome to our new members since January, Sustainable Breakfast Series. Really happy to have you all as part of the community. We have Dane County Waste and Renewables, Emmy Roth, Essential Remediation, Klein's Floral and Greenhouses, Madison Boats, Numbers for Nonprofits, Ralph K. Morris Foundation, REAP Food Group, Rooted, and the Sustainable Business Council. We also have 22 individual members. And I would like to recognize and thank all of our partners and supporters, the forest, tree, and leaf members. Membership is a really great way to join the Extension Dane network. It's a place for everyone, and benefits include complimentary attendance to programs like this one. And keep in mind, coming up, there are 3 kind of big opportunities to continue your engagement and involvement. We have our next cohort of the Accelerate Sustainability Workshop coming up. This is to assist organizations and individuals gain knowledge about sustainability, case studies, and then help take a project from start to finish. We had 100% of people recommend it last year who participated. We also have a second Master Recyclers cohort, if that's of interest. And we have a full hour of Green Team Roundtable networking coming up in June. So now on to today's program. How do we build a stronger local food system? We've brought together 4 local food leaders to talk about the intersection of food production, sourcing, and supporting diverse businesses in our region. So I'd like to welcome our moderator, Jess Guffey Calkins. She is the Community Food Systems Educator with Extension Dane. She's going to start us off by providing some data and background knowledge on what we see produced and sold locally, and she's also going to moderate this panel. You can put your questions in the Q&A box and have a chat going as you're responding to the comments. At the end, we'll have some time to talk about those as a group. Thank you for joining us today. Jess.
Great, thank you. Just want to welcome everyone, and I'm excited to be here today to have this conversation about food system sustainability and hear from our panelists who are doing very important work on the ground to strengthen our local food system. So as Claire mentioned, my name is Jess Guffey Calkins. I work at UW-Madison Extension Dane County, and I'm the Community Food Systems Educator. I work a lot with the Dane County Food Council, which we'll be mentioning a little bit more today, as well as networking and education around food systems and working to strengthen the Dane County food system. So just to start off with, I am going to give kind of some basic information about food systems in the Dane County food system, and then we will be introducing our panelists and getting more into the questions. So as far as a real basic definition of a food system, the one that I like to use is that a food system includes everything from farm to table. A community food system is a food system in which food production, processing, distribution, and consumption are integrated to enhance the environmental, economic, social, and nutritional health of a particular place. So as you can tell, it includes, all different pieces of the system, from production all the way to distribution and even resource recovery, and has just multiple effects on the whole community. So I wanted to, I just have a few slides of some information about the Dane County food system that I want to share and talk about a little bit in my introduction today. Okay. So thumbs up if folks are seeing my screen okay? Okay, perfect, thank you. So these are just a few little snippets of information about the Dane County food system, and I'm just going to cover them real briefly, but we can talk about them more later. I can always follow up with folks. But I kind of put in some information, and most of this data, I should say, is from census data and USDA, but I can provide those sources later if needed. So the Dane County population is right around 529,000 as of 2018. And then you can kind of see some breakdown by identification by race and ethnicity. And the categories listed are just the categories that were in the survey at the time that it was provided. So there's a large majority of people who identify as white, and then we have several other portions of people who identify as either Hispanic or Latino, Black or African American, Asian, American Indian, Alaska Native, or other races or more than one race. And then sort of next to that, I have the total number of Dane County food growers or producers. And so that's around 4,366, although likely more, just because the way that survey was conducted, it was only for a maximum of 4 growers or producers per farm. So certainly higher than that. And it gives an indication that even with this demographic breakdown, there is a very, very, very high majority of growers and producers who identify as white. And so that's something that we'll be getting into a little bit more during our talk today. And then I have a total here of how many jobs in the county are in agriculture related businesses. Just a few other pieces kind of about the agriculture and the farming in the county. We've got about 66% of the total county land is farmed, and that equates to about 2,566 farms. And 8% of those sell directly to consumers, and 2% of them farm organically. And we're going to get a lot more into those pieces for sure today. We also have some information about CSA farms, and CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. More on that in our panel, but there are several of those located in Dane County, as well as more outside that serve Dane County. We also have over 70 community gardens, over 29 farmers markets, including the Dane County Farmers Market is the largest US producer-only farmers market. And then my last little bit of information here shows some about on the consumption side. So there's some information about 140,000 pounds of local fruits and vegetables served in the Madison Metropolitan School District school meals within one school year. We've got some information about number of grocery stores, restaurants, food pantries, meal sites. And then as far as kind of on the health and equity and health access part of the food system, we have 7.8% of Dane County residents experiencing food insecurity, as well as 10.4% who are participating in FoodShare, also called SNAP or food stamp program benefits. And then lastly, just a little bit of information on resource and recovery is that 20.7% of the material in the landfill is food scraps. And that kind of breaks down to some amount of what's considered wasted food. So food that would be good to eat, but ends up getting wasted. And then another part of that is non-edible food scraps. And so that is a lot of information all at once that our panelists are going to help break down for us a little bit more. The other piece that I just wanted to mention before we move into the panel is regarding the effect of course, the COVID-19 pandemic on the Dane County food system. So this for sure has tested the resiliency of our local food system and food security and caused a major upheaval and many immediate enormous issues. So some of those issues caused and worsened by the pandemic include increases in food insecurity among families in Dane County and of course across the nation, compromised market opportunities and supply chains for producers and food businesses, major disruptions and restrictions for food distribution. So that's in terms of emergency food centers, school meal services, farmers markets, restaurants, and more. Many losses in employment for food workers. And then also the ability to safely access fresh, culturally appropriate food has become even more burdensome for some of our most vulnerable communities. So these conditions from the pandemic really exacerbate the weaknesses and the inequities that already existed in our food system. And they also magnify the areas where it needs strengthening. On a more positive note, even amidst all this upheaval, there's a number of opportunities and innovations that have come out of the pandemic period. This includes, there have been increased SNAP or food share benefits during this time and the ability to use SNAP online for the very first time. There have been multiple home meal delivery efforts, including Feed to Go, Farms to Families, and Forward to Families. There's been a huge increase in CSA share subscribers. There's also been a huge groundbreaking large-scale institutional purchasing project through Second Harvest called the Dane Cares Project that purchases Dane County produce and products, distributes them to food pantry clients. There's been a large farm to school local purchasing grant awarded to MMSD. There's been a Cook It Forward initiative that provides healthy, fresh meals to people experiencing food insecurity, as well as employing restaurant workers. Been a big increase in farmers and growers knowing about online ordering, skills and knowledge, as well as a new model for the Dane County Farmers Market during that time. And then lastly, there have been lots of collaboration between the Dane and Madison Food Policy Councils, as well as some increased funding for food access grants and some increased urgency to develop a regional food system plan. Okay, so as we navigate pandemic recovery, there's many food system partners that are working hard to sustain these positive changes. And on that note, there are actually many ways that businesses, organizations, and individuals can support and get involved in these efforts to strengthen the local food system. So I'm just going to share my screen one last time here to show you some of these actions that can be taken, and then we will, oops, okay, perfect. So you can see we have, this is just a brainstorm of some possibilities, but some ways to support and strengthen our food system have to do with donating to food systems initiatives or providing incentives for employees to donate, spreading the word to connect potential donors and partners to initiatives, volunteering or organizing employees to volunteer, buying local and organic, joining a CSA, shopping at the farmers market, providing CSA cost sharing and workplace pickups. Again, we'll get some more details on that. Shopping at Willie Street Co-op and using reusable bags, which supports the Double Dollars program, which is a way that food share and SNAP participants can actually be able to purchase even more produce either at farmers markets and Willie Street Co-op with their benefits. You can advocate to the 2 food councils for any specific food system needs to be addressed and funded. You can also engage in the food councils by participating or encouraging others to. You can advocate for food systems items in the state budget. And then of course, lastly, but not leastly, can continue to reduce your impact on the environment because climate change will impact our ability to produce food long-term. So I, on that note, am just going to transition here. We're very fortunate today to hear about some of the important work being done on the ground to strengthen the local food system. So today we're joined by Elena Terry, who's the executive chef and founder of Wild Bearies, Kingsley Gobourne, founder of Artemis Provisions and Cheese, and Claire Strader, the Organic Vegetable Educator for Extension Dane County and FairShare CSA Coalition. And at this point, I'm going to, one by one, just ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and their work, and then we will be moving into questions. So if I could please start with Elena Terry.
Thank you for having me. Haini P, Haini Karagiwi, Hochankarajara, Hahe Maniwenga Hingaide, Nagamaichide Rajara, Elena Terry Hingaide. Good morning. My name is Elena Terry. I'm the executive chef and founder of Wild Bearies here in Wisconsin, which is a community outreach educational nonprofit working with indigenous foods. I also have partnerships with the Intertribal Agriculture Council and the American Indian Foods Program, where I have this wonderful chance to help promote the work that's being done on behalf of preserving and sharing and having enough indigenous ingredients. And I am also one of the 2021 NDN Changemaker Fellows, working on really reigniting our indigenous food systems, not only here in Wisconsin, but across the Americas. So I absolutely love talking about food. Thank you for having me. And good morning, Kingsley and Claire. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much, Elena. We're great. Very happy to have you too. Kingsley, if you could please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. As Kingsley Gobourne, and pleasure to be here this morning. Elena, pleasure to see you as well. As we have we've met recently and have a lot of connections there. So, you know, for us, Artemis and Provisions and Cheese, our goal has been to help really bridge the gap for a lot of our farmers looking to bring their products to market. And some of the things that we do is help with that distribution and supply chain, marketing, as well as packaging and presentation for the marketplace, for what the consumers used to seeing. And we've just really enjoyed just the opportunity that we've had to work with so many different individuals, farmers, and now we're starting to work with some growers as well that include like trade routes and other organizations locally. So happy to be here today and just kind of share our story and how we play a role. So thank you.
Thank you. And I love that painting behind you on the wall as well. So it's a great backdrop. Okay, and then if we could have Claire introduce yourself, please.
I'm Claire Strader, and as Jess said, I work with Extension in Dane County and also the FairShare CSA Coalition. I'm the Organic Vegetable Educator. It's a shared position between those two organizations. So I work primarily with organic vegetable growers in Dane County and throughout Wisconsin. And there are three areas that I work in. One is providing educational programming. I do a conference and have grower gatherings, field days, that sort of thing for organic vegetable growers serving direct markets in the state. And then I also work with the Organic Vegetable Farm Manager Apprenticeship, which is the second agricultural apprenticeship in the state of Wisconsin. The dairy grazing apprenticeship was the first. And through the apprenticeship, it's got two goals. One is to support farms in attracting and training skilled labor on their existing farms, and also obviously to support and train aspiring organic vegetable growers. And then the third piece of what I do is on-farm research with a specific focus on climate change and reducing tillage on organic vegetable farms. So yeah, as Jess mentioned earlier about climate change, that was one of the to-do things. That's definitely a big part of what I look at with farmers.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all of you for sharing a little bit about what you're involved with. I think we'll move into some questions. And then I think, as Lorenza or Claire mentioned, if folks, as we have our panelist questions and conversation, if you're thinking of questions that you would like to ask at the time towards the end of our session, please do put those in the Q&A chat, Q&A field if you can. So our first question today is for Elena. So Elena, our local and national food system has far to go in ensuring that everyone has access to healthy, culturally relevant food. Can you tell us about the work that you do to not only increase food access, but also to reconnect people with where their food comes from and give them some ownership over their food?
Yes. So I think you touched on it. I mean, right now we're looking at food insecurity across the board, and we're starting to emerge a little bit more. But last year was hard, and it definitely was eye-opening for us to see how much people struggle with getting healthy food. And then when you add on culturally relevant healthy food, it's even more difficult to find. You know, the work that I do when it comes to indigenous food, and when you hear that, you think, you know, it's very plentiful, and it really is if you know where to look or where to have people grow. But to be able to share that, to be able to have a point where we can eat it, our ancestral foods, on a regular basis, that's quite a ways down the road. It's slow food, the definition of slow food, and the work that we have to do to be able to cultivate, to be able to have enough seed that has been protected and maintained in a healthy way and not affected by chemicals is very difficult. And so I like to think of it as, you know, you really have to look at our food systems as a holistic view, and what can we do, and how can we each contribute to make it more secure, not only for, you know, my community and of indigenous people, but of the communities that we reside in. Like, it's gotten to a point where some of that can't be exclusive anymore, and it's really about building these relationships and supporting each other, not only in growing food, but economically. And how can I help you continue to do the work that you're doing, and benefit, and really make those relationships happen? So a lot of the work that I do, I have a partnership with the UW, and they grow out just to help me multiply seed so that I have enough seeds to be able to go out and to be able to diversify our growing. Because I think this past year exemplified perfectly that we have no control over what the environmental you know, things that could happen to us and affect our food systems would do. And unfortunately, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to face those obstacles, especially when it comes to our food systems. So what can we do to strengthen each other, to be able to support and say, like, I know that I can get the majority of this crop, you know, out to people in the community that will utilize it. And then once we think about being able to feed each other in our communities, we can start talking about the healing power that comes from the food. And that's really what I focus on. When you look at the food system holistically, or about how you have a cultural connection to certain foods, it doesn't have to be exclusively indigenous in the connection I have with our food systems, but it's about those memories and those ancestors, and being able to, I think of food as a vessel, right? It can transport us to different places, to different times. It elicits memories that aren't only about consumption, they're sensical. You know, a smell can bring you back to places, or can make you think of the future and saying that I hope that someday my grandchildren will be able to consume this, and to be able to share it plentifully. So it's really about making those small steps and realizing that we have a part to play right now, today, and what that can be, to make sure that tomorrow is a little better. And then tomorrow we have a part to play, you know, and just building from there, because we have been stagnant in our food systems. And part of it was from an economy after World War II, and really saying that food systems had a connection to our social status, and you might be considered less if you ate some of these other foods, where now we're realizing that those foods bring so much more nourishment in a different way to us, that they are so crucial that we continue the knowledge, and that the knowledge sharers become more knowledge seekers, and that we really are able to preserve and progress when it comes to mindful consumption and culturally relevant and responsible agriculture. There's so many things that need to change, but I love that the wheels are in motion, and I love that people are feeling that connection, and that the work is being done And one positive thing about, having to interact this way is that we're able to interact with people that we might not have been able to interact with before, and to see the work that's being done where it might have been, for me and my farm, it's pretty much a very small group of people that work there. And being able to reach out and meet more that are in that same situation just for solidarity, there's a lot of strength in that, and there's a lot of hope. So I'm excited to see what the future has to bring.
That's awesome. Thank you, Elena. Yeah, I love that vision that you have, and like you said, kind of one step at a time there. My next question is for Kingsley. Kingsley, can you tell us more about how you connect your sociology work at UW, diversity and inclusion work at Unity Point Meriter, and your work founding and running Artemis Provisions?
Yes, definitely. As Elena was talking, there was so many things that she said that was so spot on, and I think one of the things that we we know but we don't really talk about and raise up is the access to just quality nutrition and how it affects the outcomes and our livelihoods. Um, and she also mentioned, that shift in American culture where it was no longer cool to even raise backyard chickens, right? Or if you were going to forage for mushrooms or other things, wow, geez, that must mean something about your status and who you are. That, along with media, the increase of processed foods, the sugar industry itself, all these really compile to really destroy a food system that was creating much healthier Americans and people um, that we are now. And so the work that I do at Unity Point Health often talks around the disparities. What are the differences within the population that we see? And the things that we saw at UW, a lot of the focus is around maternal child health. But overall, we notice that based on the backgrounds, whether you're indigenous populations, whether you're immigrant population, people of color living in these communities, those who didn't have access to quality, nutritious products that were oftentimes tied to their cultural food systems had worse outcomes. And there's other factors, right? Some of those factors are stress. Some of those factors have to deal with social factors and pressures that they face. Some of those factors are systemic and they don't have access, right? There's food deserts, there's areas, and when you do have grocery stores, oftentimes they don't carry the things that you need in order to prepare your dishes culturally. And even when they do have it, it's oftentimes not of the highest nutrition because it's being shipped from long ways away. And so I saw these things prior to starting Artemis Provisions and Cheese. And on my personal journey, what I found is that I was struggling. I was over 320 pounds. I had AFib, tachycardia, a heart condition. I had a tumor removed from my chest. And a friend finally said, "Hey, there's signs right now. You're doing all these things, right? You're at the gym, curling, trying to run on a treadmill, and these things are still happening to you. What are you eating?" And that's when I made a shift for myself. I started buying my beef locally, and then I started buying our chickens. And I realized that there was an amazing increase in taste. And when I started buying my eggs, that's when the nutritional part actually connected for me. Because I cracked open like one of my first free range, not just a brown egg, because there's a lot of commercial birds that can lay a brown egg, but a free range egg. And I cracked it open, and I was actually taken back. I grew up in Jamaica, but I moved here in third grade, so I don't remember what it was like when we had chickens in Jamaica that were free range and we were using those eggs, and the color of the egg, the thickness of the yolk and the membrane. I was kind of shocked, and I pointed this out, and we actually went and bought some eggs from Quick Trip, came home and cracked them. And I even recently did a presentation with Channel 15 in which we talked about the difference between that. But that told me something. It's not about just having an egg or having an access to that. It's what's the quality of the nutrition in that product that you're buying, and how does that affect your health? And 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 so what I also realized was the cost. So once you start realizing that, great, farm to table is great, free range eggs are great, um, But how does someone of low economic means, how does someone who doesn't have it in their neighborhood or have access these products? And there really wasn't a great way not to do it affordably. And so working directly with our producers who oftentimes have a difficulty in bringing this product to consumers, immigrants, people of color, indigenous populations, now through Artemis has that opportunity. And so we can access those great locally grown resources and turn around and provide it to individuals right here in Dane County. And and so that's kind of how I've really worked to connect, Unity Point Health, Merida, and the work I do in disparities with this food system, because those are the populations that had the hardest time accessing it. And based on the outcomes that we're having with health, when we see diabetes, what we see in high blood pressure, hypertension, what we see in obesity, all these things are related to that broken food system. And so we try to play our role in helping to repair that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's I love that story of all those things that you brought together and how that inspired the work that you're doing. Thank you for sharing that. Claire, I wanted to know, so your work with growers who utilize community supported agriculture, or CSA, for some or all the way that they distribute their food to consumers. Could you tell us a little bit more about the CSA model and why it's important for farmers, especially in this past year of the pandemic?
Sure. So the quick sort of description of CSA, or community supported agriculture, is that it is a system by which farmers grow food locally, so which means it's always going to be in season in the local area and fresh. And then it is distributed to members of the CSA who sign up at the beginning of the season and choose to participate with a particular farm in that model. And CSA in this country has its roots in a couple of different places. One is a farm that I actually worked near in New Hampshire. The first farm that I worked on was in Temple, New Hampshire, and the Temple Wilton farm was the first called CSA farm in the United States. But the idea of members and community members participating in community supported agriculture actually predates those first CSA quote unquote farms in the States, and originated with, I have actually never heard Booker T. Whatley's last name pronounced, and so it might be Waitley instead of Whatley. I'm not sure which it is. But he was a professor at Tuskegee University in Alabama. He's a Black author and horticulturalist who developed this idea. He called it clientele membership clubs. And the idea was that the farmers would produce the food and then the community would come and actually pick that food on the farm. So it had to be local, right? Because you had to be able to get to the farm in order to pick it. And that also is a really important foundational concept in CSA that then grew into what we recognize here in the States now as CSA. So there's kind of a long-winded, a little bit more in-depth history of CSA. And it really, the second part of your question, what is important about that to farmers and how did that change, or how was CSA impacted in 2020 with COVID? From the beginning, CSA, no matter which of these models or strains, the way CSA has evolved, the real core of it is twofold. One is that the members of the farm, or the community that's eating from the farm, is getting access to that really fresh, really local, depending on who your farmer is and what their growing skills are and what part of the world you're from, also hopefully culturally relevant foods from that farm. Not everything can be grown here in the States, so it does depend. And certainly different things can be grown in different parts of the United States as well. So that's what the eaters, the members, are getting out of it. And then from the farmer's perspective, the thing that the farmers are getting is that commitment from this community that will be eating the food. And so it's a financial commitment in terms of buying that food up front or through the course of payments over the course of the season. And it's also a commitment to kind of being informed about and participating in that farm to the extent that is reasonable and appropriate, both for the members and the farmers. So when I was just starting to farm, I myself was a farmer for about 20 years and did CSA as part of that. I had the opportunity to visit the Temple Wilton farm, and there was a requirement that members not pick their food, but participate, like do some volunteer work at the farm. And it was really interesting to see like how one family had come out and thoroughly weeded this area of the onion bed. And then the other part was like still very weedy and waiting for the next family to come in and do it. So that's part of the community aspect of it, as well as that we're participating together in this food system. In terms of 2020 and COVID, the thing that, as you mentioned, Jess, like CSAs really took off, and that in COVID, and the thing that I think both Elena and Kingsley have been talking about without, saying these words exactly the way I'm about to say them, is like part of what 2020 exposed for me is like how essential, we talked a lot about essential workers and that sort of thing in 2020, local food is essential for our healthy community food system. And that was a big part of what 2020 exposed, because or COVID rather exposed, is because as people were looking for safe and reliable access to food, they looked to local food producers. And that was part of why CSA really took off. They knew it was fresh, they knew it was local, and that you could pick it up in a way that required sort of sadly, minimal direct contact with others. There certainly is an opportunity for more direct contact, but you can also like just go and get that food. So one, without having to touch other people or breathe the same air, and hopefully that will be changing now in 2021. But I want to give one example of how CSA really took off. We had many farms so the FairShare CSA Coalition is a coalition of 40 producers that sell through the CSA model and into other direct markets as well for fresh vegetables. And one of the farms in the coalition works at the Farley Center. The CSA name is Los Jalapenos. He's like the mentor farm at the Farley Center in Verona, Wisconsin. And he tripled his CSA membership in 2020. And he's an established, organized, careful farmer who just, had things in place so that he was able to do that, which benefited him in terms of his balance sheet and benefited all of those 3 times as many people eating from his farm.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing all that information about CSA and lots of knowledge there around how that came about. I appreciate that. So I have a question for Elena, and actually someone mentioned this in the chat, so it's connected to that too. Someone is very curious about the lovely jars of food and seeds behind you. So Elena, we were wondering if you could tell us about your seed keeping work and its importance in preserving tribal foodways.
Yes, of course. And I wanted to share this with everybody. Kingsley and Claire mentioned it. It's not something that you can go to the store and get, right? You have to know that it's going to be grown, and growing it locally means that it's fresher. There's not preservatives added. It's not as affected, by en route things that might have to happen. But in order to grow our foods, the traditional and the ancestral foods, we have to make sure that we seed save. So I am a chef, and I absolutely love my role as a chef in the food system, because I kind of get to be involved with everybody in sourcing and in supporting. But I also have my own garden, and I have a secret seed garden that I have to have very protected so that we keep from cross-pollinating and being affected and changing that ancestral line that has happened for centuries. And it is pretty neat. There's this whole rematriation is the term that they give it of the seeds to their ancestral homelands. And some of the seeds that have been returned or shared have just given us this incredible bounty and delicious flavors that you can't find from going to the store and getting something that's mass produced. But it is definitely work that needs to be thought about. My favorite squash, and I always talk about it, is this Pueblo Hubbard that I got from Taos, New Mexico. That for them, they had so many in their garden. And the first time I opened it, I was like, oh my gosh, this squash is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, you know? And is it sweet? Is it savory? It worked in all applications that I tried it in. And they said I could keep the seeds from that one squash that I cooked with. And these are what's left of that original squash. And I have the originals and I always keep a few of them. But I knew that I had to diversify the growing of it. So I grew it here. Jessica Green Deer grew it in Minnesota at Dream of Wild Health. And then Shelly Buffalo grew it at the Meskwaki Food Sovereignty Initiative Seed Saving Gardens. And it's a beautiful thing that Shelly did because she was the only one that had a successful grow last year. We had terrible vine borers that came out here and at Dream of Wild Health. So we just had to pull all of the plants early on to make sure that it didn't contaminate any more of our plants in the garden. But Shelly had this beautiful, bountiful harvest and was able to get enough seeds. And that was just with one thing, the Pueblo Hubbard. And when we think of all of the things that we have to cultivate in order to provide for our communities, part of that just naturally is seed saving. And as a chef, I get to have those ingredients before they go out, and it just is natural that I would become a seed saver, you know, rather than discarding or taking those, you know, just harvested seeds and then bringing them to somebody else and having them care for them. I always like to think that the seeds created the journey and I'm just along for the ride, you know. They're so important that in some tribal communities, they are given tribal membership, which means they would have every right and protection that any tribal member would have. I mean, seeds are sleeping, but they're alive. And when you put them in the ground and you nurture them, you know, they fulfill their destiny. That's the way we look at it. And they're able to do what they were meant to do, which is provide that nourishment. But it is slow work. We had a seed returned to us that was an ancestral ho-chunk seed. And every time I think of it, I just like fill with joy because it was something that our ancestors grew for us during these great moves and it provided for us and then it disappeared. And 2 years ago, it came back to us. But we only had 10 seeds. There were 10 seeds in existence. And well, there were 20, 10 of them stayed in their safe spot and 10 of them were sent to us to multiply. But that's something maybe in 5 years we'll have enough seed to distribute in our community because we have to start with those 10 plants. And then those 10 plants might give us, you know, 30 plants and we need to save some of those seeds. And I mean, it's a very long process, but it's so rewarding to see them grow and thrive. And when you share that story that they've journeyed on with the people that you feed and say that all this mindful care, nurturing, and nourishment was put into these seeds to provide, it changes the meal. You know, you appreciate it a little bit more and you feel everything that was put into that from the time, you know, centuries ago that it was carried in clothes and woven into hair at times to be able to be here today. And now we are able to help it fulfill its destiny, right? And nourish us in ways that are different. So it is very rewarding, but it is very time consuming and really something where, like I said, these are protected. I keep them close to me and I know where they're all at. And I only care for, you know, a few of these plants that are being grown. There are people, you know, seed savers across the Americas that make sure that we have this. And because those thoughts were put in place and instilled in our DNA that it was crucial we continued to grow these foods is why we have them here today. So what can we do today to make sure that the future generations still have these beautiful plants?
That's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely got chills when you were talking about that. So Yeah, it's a definite labor of love, and I love that story. I wanted to ask Claire, when to mention, so you work primarily with organic certified vegetable farmers. Could you provide some details about organic growing practices and how buying from organic growers benefits the environment and our health?
Sure. Yeah, I teach. Oh, well, first I want to say thanks to Elena for those stories. As someone who has like done a little tiny bit of seed saving, all respect for how difficult that is, and the cross pollination and the immense amount of care that goes into getting the keeping those seeds true. So back to organic. I also teach some gardening classes for organic vegetable gardeners, not farmers, and so certified organic is something that's really important for commercial production, meaning people who are growing it for sale to others. For gardeners, it's not like there's no reason to certify your garden as organic. But it's still like, so the way I explain it from the gardening scale is true, is also true for the farming scale, is like organic is a way of growing that hopefully the goal of it is to have nature in balance as much as possible. So the picture I always show when I talk about that is a tomato hornworm in my garden on my tomato plant that is completely dead and parasitized by the braconid wasps that, laid its eggs on its back, and they hatched out, and then all those little wasps went off to kill other tomato hornworms. And the goal with organic is not that all the tomato hornworms die and that only braconid wasps live, as one example of a pair of beneficial and destructive insects in the vegetable garden, but rather that those things are in balance. Because if all of one or the other is gone, then we're not going to ever be in balance. So that's how I like to look at organic, is like I said, that balance. And it starts in the soil, making sure that we have good, healthy soil, and that we're applying as few outside inputs in terms of fertility, pesticides, herbicides, those kinds of things, like trying to not apply those and minimize that. And of course, with certified organic production, there are very clear parameters around what is allowed in that production system in terms of supplemental products, like all those things I mentioned, for fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, and what is not allowed. And then the organic certification is a third-party verification that a farm is following those standards, excuse me, those organic standards that are now set by the federal government. Wow, I'm gonna just cough here for 1 second. It's always every presenter's nightmare, right? So that the rules around organic certification are governed by our government, and there's a process. Like I said, a third party comes in and verifies that a farm is following those practices. Why is that important? How does it affect the environment? It affects the environment in the ways that I just mentioned. One example, maybe like a way to bring that home, is there are some things that are used. There are some additions or products that are used in organic production that I learned about a long time ago when I was learning to farm. One is called BT, or Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bacteria that affects very specific insects in the garden, and a very small number of them, and it doesn't affect humans at all. And that is an example of a product that, because it is so specific, it's only working on those cabbage worms, for instance. It's not having this broad effect in the garden or on the farm, killing all worms or all moths, for instance. And so that is a way to, as I said, keep that balance a little bit more in check. And when a big broad spectrum product is used, then it brings down the population of both beneficial and pest insects. Again, just in the insect world, this can be, used for herbicides and fertility as well. Gosh, am I just like totally digging in on farm production? I'm going to stop that. That's like who I normally talk to. So I apologize. and back to why organic might be important outside of these farming things. For me as a consumer, when I am looking to buy organic food, I want to purchase organic food for my own personal health and also because of these effects on the environment that I was getting into a little bit too much detail about. And I also want to say that organic certification is not the be all end all. It's not the best thing necessarily. The way organic has been conceived in this country, it was a grassroots movement started by farmers originally and has been in some ways co-opted by these large scale industrial organic um, farms, and also by the politics in our government around like people advocating for certain products not to be removed from the organic list because of XYZ reasons. And so I don't look at organic as like, this is the best thing we can do. I look at organic as the minimum that we can do. And we have to do better than that also. And that includes things like fair labor standards, culturally appropriate foods, et cetera, et cetera. So I I want to say one other thing also about access to organic foods. The FairShare CSA Coalition, which I talked about before, all of the producers in that coalition are required to be certified organic, as I said earlier, as a minimum requirement, not a maximum requirement. And there's a higher price point for organic foods. That's just true. They take longer. There's more labor involved in producing them. There are reasons why the prices tend to be higher. And that has one of the first programs that FairShare initiated 30 years ago when the coalition started was called the Partner Shares program, which subsidized the cost of CSH shares, organic vegetables, through CSA, to make those foods more available to people on SNAP or having other economic difficulties, economically vulnerable families who wanted access to that fresh and local food, in a way where they also get some choice about what they're getting. They get to choose the farm they want to be involved in, et cetera, et cetera. So that subsidy has been around all those 30 years. It's had some changes to it in 2020 that makes it a little more flexible and accessible. And it's a really important and foundational piece of FairShare and making those organic foods and organic foods through CSA available to a broader diversity of people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. You got a lot of happiness in the chat about your descriptions and explanations. And I also saw Kingsley nodding along quite a bit. So I actually wanted to mention, I don't know if folks realize that Kingsley started Artemis Provisions at basically the same time that the pandemic hit. So as we move into the pandemic recovery phase, Kingsley, what are some of your hopes for Artemis Provisions moving forward?
Well, our big hopes when we first started last year was to actually be part of farmers markets and to be making some of those connections. And obviously last year that all changed. For us this year, we're looking for the best way to position ourselves just so we're known and people know that we're out there and how they can access the foods and the products that we have. Some of the things that we've actually looked at doing is how do we continue to lower the cost in what we do. And so we've co-opted with some of our producers actually to help purchase animals, rent additional land, and share in the early cost of expanding to make sure that we can meet the need of our consumers. And that's also brought our cost basis down and allowed us to then be able to provide our products at still low price compared to what's in the market. I do want to just comment on one of the things that Claire said around organic farming and some of the things that we're looking to do. That is so important. And I was not aware, and this has been such a learning journey for me. But one of the things that we're looking at doing and growing is it's doing regenerative farming. And we're now at the point where we have cows, goats, sheep, and chicken. And when you all see them out there actually working together, it actually clicks. You understand how just the animals themselves in the proper environment doing what they naturally do actually work so well together. The goats clear all the brush for us, and the chickens are there to eat all these insects and bugs, and they're clearing those things out. And the sheep and cow do what they do. They really kind of keep the grass down, um, and we can keep them all in this one place. So it's been really exciting for us. Is how do we share that? How do we talk about that? How do we educate people on the process that we take as well? So they understand, although we might not be organic by label because that's a cost that we'd have to pass on to the consumer, it's a time commitment in doing so, especially since we rent land. We'd have to literally go back in time to prove the last time that pesticides and herbicides were used. And so what we want to do is just educate people on the process that we use, educate people on the relationship that we have with our animals and they have with each other, and then let them know that we're here. And so those are our big goals for this year, and we're looking to do that in various ways through pop-ups and farmers markets and continued partnerships.
That's awesome. Thank you. Um, so I just want to do a little kind of check in with folks. I know we're getting close to, I think we're actually going to be able to go to about 9:35, just to let folks know. We are going to switch into taking some of the questions, and there have been some really amazing ones coming in the kind of the Q&A in the chat. So I'm going to switch into trying to pull out a couple of those, excuse me, from audience members for our panelists, and then if anyone does need to get off before 9:35, this is all recorded just to let you know, so you'll be able to access it afterwards. And then also we have the networking portion after this portion, if anyone's able to join with that. So actually for Kingsley, I wanted to, there was a question in the chat. Someone mentions our farm lost our original slot for pigs to the processor last year. How can we use what we learned during this past year to make sure our supply chain works for small farmers and producers? And I wanted to see if you might speak to that a bit.
Definitely. That's one of the benefits that we've actually been able to bring to a lot of our small farmers. Pig producers, goat, sheep. Some of our small producers might only have 20, 30 head of like sheep or goat, and they might only have 100 pigs or so. And for them, based on how often they're getting orders for a whole pig, which is usually how they sell it, or a half pig, it makes it very hard for them to get their product into processors, and therefore they sometimes get bumped. We've heard of people waiting well over a year, to the point where they'll bring an animal in and then they'll schedule their next animal for next year. So what we've been able to do is we first of all have some benefits. I grew up in southwestern Wisconsin, and I grew up in an area near Darlington in which I played football and sports with a family who owns Avon Meat Locker. We have worked with them. They understand what our purpose is and how we're trying to help small farmers. And because of that, they have worked to allow us to basically partner with them to bring in our animals when needed. So for individuals who are looking to, how do we help with our supply chain? How do we get our animals at the right time? Those are things that we could help them with. We have slots available, and then we can work those animals through that slot. And the next best thing is to always then partner to scale up to help make that happen. And that might mean working with someone who's doing more hogs or doing hogs as well. But if you guys can go in and say, hey, no matter what, we're going to have 5 animals every week that we want harvested. They don't always have to be your 5. They could be your partner's 5 or somebody else from that co-op. But that makes it more advantageous than for these local meat processors, because they need to also be really good at generating that income, which means they need to be able to be harvesting and processing at a regular basis. And so they oftentimes will cater to the largest farms who can bring in a whole herd at a time. We've been fortunate in building those relationships and having those relationships for several years. And now we've really extended that opportunity to, I have individuals who their meat doesn't actually end up in our packaging or wrapping ever, but we help them get their meat through processing, because it's important for their product to get out there in the market. It's just a better product. So that's one ways that you could do it. And I'll put our website in the chat, or my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me. I want to work with anyone who wants to help get their products through that logistical nightmare at times.
That's excellent. Thank you, Kingsley. So I think there's a question in the Q&A that I'm going to put out there for any panelists, any or all, to kind of weigh in, because it definitely connects to everyone. and is very appropriate for Sustain Dane community. So we, let's see here. So there was a mention earlier of Project Drawdown, which ranks reduced food waste and plant-rich diets as among the 4 most effective ways to reduce emissions worldwide to keep the global temperature increased to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. So would the panelists please comment on how local community food systems can promote both reducing food waste and encouraging a shift to more plant-rich diets here in Dane County?
Can talk about that a little bit from the perspective of vegetable farmers, I guess. That sounds really great. Let's switch to, or increase plants in our diets. And I feel like it's easy to get caught in around this question about plant-rich diets. It's easy to get caught in an either or kind of mentality of like, I have to only eat plants, or I don't want to call myself a vegetarian. I certainly would never be vegan because that I just don't want to give up those flavors, or don't think that that's, fully healthy for me, or whatever. Like all these things come into play. And what we eat is so personal. Like there isn't anything more personal we do in some ways other than nourish our bodies. We are feeding all those cells in our bodies with what we put into our mouths, and it's very personal. And so I have choices that I've made around my food and what I eat, and I don't think that, well, I know for sure that is like I am not in sync with a majority of the people who are feeding themselves with my food choices. And so it's important for me to not get caught up in that either or, and instead say, like, if we can eat more plants and when we eat meat, when we eat animals, eat them from local producers using organic and sustainable methods, that's such a great place to start. It doesn't really matter. Like you can have a goal and get somewhere, and like, but I'm tired of fighting with people about like vegetarianism and veganism and whether meatless Mondays make sense and how animals are important to the system. Like, and none of those are reasons why I cannot eat less meat. I choose to eat less meat. It's important. It's important because we spend the vast majority of our agricultural land in this country is used growing corn and soybeans and animal feed. And when we do that, we only get a small percentage of the caloric value, the nutritional value, the health value back into our human bodies. And so, yeah, more land put into food, less land put into feed is going to feed more people. Doesn't mean we don't eat animals. It means we eat more plants than we have. Kingsley, I saw you come off mute, and I'm so excited to hear what you have to say.
I am with you. I think we've talked about this so much today. There's a balance to this all. And different cultures have different relationships with the animals around them. And I think what ends up happening is the scale of business and corporations, they create a monster out of everything. And to your point, we spend so much of our great agricultural land, just land period, raising things that really serve us no purpose and go right to feed. And that's not even the best thing for the animals. I mean, if your animals are eating soy and corn, that's not putting great nutrition back into that animal. It's adding a lot of fat, and I don't even want to go down to the other factors there, because I want to kind of just focus on the fact that the whole point of this, I think, is to be able to be sustainable. How do you raise enough animals to sustain the population who needs it? How do we manage our consumption, and have that match what we've done culturally, right? And how do we eat more fish? I mean, we're in the middle of the Midwest, but I'm Jamaican, and I can never find access to the things that I need when it comes to fish. Years ago, I went to Growing Power over in Milwaukee, and I was just like stunned, because here Will had this huge tank of tilapia, and the plants were growing, and I was just like, this is heaven, right? Like you can grow all of your vegetables and stuff right here, and it's all working together with the fish. And for people like me, I would be happy to take the tilapia off of your hands. And so I think we have the opportunity to build systems that are sustainable, that allow you to, if you want to eat more vegetables, that's something that you have to make on a dietary and a cultural decision. Um, but that doesn't affect us as well, because we know people want to eat meat, and so it's how do we have that balance, and how do we make it sustainable? So we have more grass-fed animals, and they're eating their natural um, diets, and how does that translate into just a better, more nutritious product? That's where my concern is. Um, but yeah, Claire, I'm with you. Let's not fight about that. Vegans, carnivores, let's all come together and just be sustainable, healthy, and smart about our food.
I just have one last note to support what you guys said. I am a butcher and a farmer. You know, I absolutely think that we need to realize when we look at the greater picture that we all have a space where we can relate. And if anything, we are all consumers. Like we all have to eat. So it's about being natural stewards of the land, finding the space that we thrive and we connect with, and then being responsible about how we relate to that space with our food systems. Anything overdone will, like anything in excess, will deplete. If it's animals, if it's growing irresponsibly or mass production, it's going to deplete us. And when we look at the greater scheme, like we also need a place to live. And the way that we have been growing and the way that we have been consuming has not been respectful of the places that we live as humans, as part of this food chain. And so it's what everybody can do, the small steps that will make huge differences for the future. It's not something that we can just say today is going to be different, but we can live differently, and we can make those choices to teach our children differently and to work cooperatively and to really respect every person's place that they relate in the food chain and honor that space. And I think making those changes, I've seen it starting, and it's ripples, and hopefully we'll be able to generate these massive waves of change in our communities and across the world when it comes to consuming.
That is excellent. Thank you for that beautiful thought at the end here for us, Elena. I think we are. I hate to end this conversation because it's really engaging, but luckily we can port over to the networking. So just to let folks know, there is a link in the chat for the networking room Zoom, and then there's also a link in there for a Google form to provide some feedback. So I don't know, Claire Alexchik, if there's more that we need to say.
No, there isn't. Just thank you all for being here today.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll see you over on the other Zoom. Take care.